minutes. It is day 48 of this war. And now, finally, we have a plan which is likely to be implemented. This is something that's been confirmed by Qatar, which has been mediating right from the very beginning. Now, according to the Qatari officials, the much-awaited truce will begin at about 7 a.m. Friday morning. And if everything goes according to plan, then this temporary ceasefire will, of course, last for a period of 4 days. Now, what this deal, of course, means is that there will be a humanitarian pause and there will be a pause in the campaign of relentless bombings that the state of Israel has been carrying out. But in the northern part of Gaza, the humanitarian pause will only be for a period of 6 hours. So far, 14,000 lives have been lost. Nearly about 70% of all those who have been killed happen to be women and children. At about 4 p.m. local time in the Gaza Strip, about 13 hostages are expected to be released by Hamas. And the spokesperson for the Qatari Foreign Ministry has given the details of the deal under which these hostages will be released in exchange for a 4-day pause.
The beginning of the pause will be 7 a.m. Friday, the 24th of November, and it will last, of course, as agreed, for 4 days. And the first batch of civilians to be released from Gaza will be around 4 p.m. of the same day.
Now, Qatar has said that the list of the civilians to be released from Gaza has in fact been received. The list was said to be the last-minute detail on which the truce, which was supposed to come into effect from today, was delayed for a period of a day. Now, Qatar has said that the criteria on who is to be released is purely humanitarian. Getting women and children out of harm's way has been the guiding force in deciding on who is to be released. All right, now to give us more updates in terms of what, of course, is happening from the Israeli side, we're being joined by Caroline Glick, who's a former foreign policy advisor to Prime Minister Netanyahu. She's joining us from Jerusalem. Now, Ms. Glick, this, of course, is a deal that had been anticipated. It is day 48 of this conflict. People within Israel had been demanding right from day one that the priority of the Israeli government should be to secure the release of the hostages. But now, it is 48 days that this deal has been arrived at. What is the mood like within the state of Israel that this deal, which secures the release of some hostages, has finally been arrived at?
There's a bittersweet mood here, maybe more bitter than sweet. We're very happy. We've been waiting. We're praying night and day for our hostages to be safe and for them to be returned to us. But like you said, even if the deal goes through in full, something that there's no reason to believe will happen, but even if it does, we'll still have 180 or 185 or 190 hostages still in Gaza. So this isn't going to end the hostage crisis. Also, you have to realize that the Palestinians that Israel is going to be releasing are not innocent souls that have been languishing in prison. They're terrorists, and they've been convicted of terrorist crimes, including stabbing attacks, Molotov cocktail attacks, attempted shootings, attempted murder of Israelis just because they're Israelis. These are Palestinian murderers or would-be murderers, and they're going to be released. Some of them are women, some of them are minor, but they're terrorists. So this isn't some sort of morally equivalent population. Not only that, we're supposed to give 3 to 1, so that for every innocent Israeli hostage, and here we're just talking about the children and their mothers, we're going to be releasing three terrorists from our jails. So this is very dangerous for Israel.
You know, Ms. Glick, I'll come to the criticism within Israel about, the Palestinian prisoners are also being released, because there's a lot of criticism within Netanyahu's government as to why this should not have been done. But the question that I want to ask you is, there are reports within the Israeli media which say that this very deal that the Netanyahu government has now agreed to had been offered to the Netanyahu government before. It was rejected by Netanyahu, but now the Netanyahu government is buckled under pressure for not having done enough in securing the release of the Israeli hostages. Is that what has happened? Has Netanyahu now buckled under pressure?
I mean, it's hard to know pressure from who. Look, I mean, I think the problem is that we're treating the hostages that are being held by Hamas as something that Israel can solve. And the truth is that the people who were supposed to solve this problem were the Qataris, who are part of Hamas. I mean, Hamas's entire leadership lives in Doha in the lap of luxury, and so them coming in pretending to be mediators isn't true. They're representing Hamas. They fund Hamas, they house Hamas, they sponsor Hamas. And if the United States had wanted to pressure for the release of the hostages, then they would have put the pressure on Qatar. And instead, this pressure has come onto the Israeli government, and the implications of that pressure is you have to bow to this genocidal terrorist organization, this jihadist organization that just conducted the largest slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust,
Right.
inside of Israeli territory. So I think it's sort of an unfair question to ask. Did he buckle under pressure? Should we have taken this horrible deal a week ago? I mean, you know, why? The real question that it has to be asked and directed towards the proper people is, why is Qatar being treated like an ally in the war against terror when they're terrorists?
You know, I think you've brought up a point about the mediating nation Qatar, but a lot of people in fact turn around and say that it was the policy of Benjamin Netanyahu to bolster Hamas in the Gaza Strip. And he did this to undermine the authority of the Palestinian Authority and the Mahmoud Abbas administration in the West Bank. You know, how does the Netanyahu camp, in fact, look at this criticism where Netanyahu has gone on record and said that his strategy is to bolster Hamas? And now this is a strategy that is clearly blown back in the face of Netanyahu, who has dubbed himself as Mr. Security.
See, that's not even true. I mean, Netanyahu his strategy hasn't been to bolster Hamas, it's been to fight Hamas. It's just not true.
He's gone on record, he said this. I mean, there are reports about it. People can look this up. This is something that he said. The reason why he wanted to bolster Hamas is because he wanted to undermine Mahmoud Abbas's Palestinian Authority.
That's not true. But in regards to the Palestinian Authority, you have to understand from the perspective of Israel, there's no actual difference between the two. I mean, the Palestinian Authority is engaged actively in massive amounts of terrorism against Israel. They're paying salaries to the mass murderers who conducted the slaughter on October 7th that are sitting in Israeli jails, and they're paying pensions to the families of the ones who have been killed. They pay salaries and pensions to all of the terrorists who have been convicted of killing Israelis and attempting to kill Israelis that are sitting in Israeli jails, and pay pensions to all of their families. Right. So it's just, you know, it's as if he's supporting the devil because he doesn't want to support an angel. That's not true. You're talking about two regimes that are terrorist regimes that seek the annihilation of the Jewish people and the Jewish state. And,
but I want to come back to this deal that has in fact been struck. Ms. Glick, I think we are wavering away from the deal that has been struck. I want to bring the focus back to the deal that has been struck. Now, within Netanyahu's administration, there was almost a bit of a rebellion against this deal. Itamar Ben-Gvir, the interior minister, has in fact said that this deal is amoral and should not have even been struck. How does Netanyahu deal with members of his own government, the far-right faction, the extreme far-right faction, who are against this deal? Because they say what this does is it takes away the momentum of the war and it strengthens Hamas and it positions Israel in a weaker light. Is that an assessment that the Netanyahu administration also agrees with?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think anybody is deluding himself into thinking that this actually improves Israel's position militarily vis-a-vis Hamas. It doesn't. All it does is hopefully see the freeing of our babies who are being held by these monsters in Gaza. That's all it does. And it helps them militarily, absolutely, because I just read, and I hope it's not true, but if it is, it's an absolute disaster that during the course of this ceasefire, 200 trucks full of resupply to Hamas are going to be entering Gaza, along with 4 petrol trucks bringing in fuel to fuel the Hamas war machine. They call it humanitarian assistance, but that's not what it is. Hamas controls still the border crossing with with Egypt, which means that they control all of these trucks. So all this is resupply to Hamas. If that's true, 200 trucks, that's an enormous amount of resupply to this genocidal terror army of jihadists. And I really think that that's the problem. Nobody is deluded
should not be sent to the people of Gaza. Is that what you're saying, Ms. Glick?
Absolutely. It's not going to them. It's going to Hamas. And if some of them get it, it's only Hamas loyalists. I mean, the people of Gaza have said so. It's not me saying it. That's not my allegation.
But the humanitarian
That's what
aid
the
is being
people of
sent
Gaza are
by the
saying.
international community under the watch of the United Nations,
And
agreed
it's
to by the
being
United
received
States of
by
America.
Hamas.
And what is going
Right.
in is food, medical supplies, and water. How
And it's
does the
controlled
state
by
of Israel
Hamas.
say
And it's
that
all
it does
controlled
not
by
want
Hamas.
to provide humanitarian aid for people who've been denied access to food, water, and electricity for 48 long
Who's
days?
been denied access to food and water? I'm sorry, I don't actually understand what you're talking about. Who's being denied access to food and water? And to the extent that's happening, whose fault is it? It's Israel's fault? It's Hamas's
But are you saying
fault.
that Israel is
Who's
not denying
denying
food,
the Red
water,
Cross
and
access?
electricity to
Excuse
people
me,
in
who's
the
denying
Palestinian
the Red
territories?
Cross?
No, Ms. Glick,
It's
let
Hamas.
me just
Hamas is
clarify
in
this.
charge.
Are you saying that Israel
Hamas
is
is in
not
charge.
imposing a blockade that has denied the Palestinian people food and water?
Of course not. That's not true. I mean, what a blockade of a terrorist regime is not some sort of humanitarian crime. It is a crime against humanity to keep people under the boot of a genocidal terrorist organization whose central goal is the commission of genocide. That's a crime against humanity. And we have to be clear in our moral compass about who the problem is.
That is what it is tantamount to.
No,
this is
no,
what
the
has been
people who are
reported
collectively
for the last
punishing.
7+
No,
weeks
the
since this
people who are
conflict has gone on.
collectively punishing. I'm terribly sorry, but the people who are carrying out collective punishment are Hamas terrorists. They collectively punished the 1,200 Israelis who they slaughtered on October 7th. They're collectively punishing 240 innocent Israeli hostages who have not been given their under a humanitarian law, their right to visits by the International Committee of the Red Cross, and they're continuing to deny them that. We have Israeli hostages who have been denied medical care and are dead, okay, because they were murdered by these people in a crime against humanity. Israel is not conducting a crime against humanity because it's fighting a moral and just and lawful war against this genocidal terrorist regime in Gaza. And misplacing the guilt and the moral atrocity and placing it on the victim of Hamas, on Israel, rather than on Hamas itself is atrocious. I'm terribly
let me
sorry.
just interject there. I think you're making some important points, but this war has now gone on for 48 long days. The world has, of course, witnessed what has happened there. And you say that Israel is not denying food, water, and other basic necessities of life to the people in the Gaza Strip. Let's in fact listen in to some reactions. Ms. Glick, I'll come back to you. Let's listen in to some reactions that in fact just come in from Doha. Ever since this truce agreement has in fact been announced, let's listen in to some of the reactions that have been put out by some of the leaders about the details of the deal that should kick in from 7 a.m. in the morning, local time, in the Gaza Strip.
Very close. We could bring some of these hostages home very soon, but I don't want to get into the details of things because nothing is done until it's done.
The hostage deal that was approved last night is clear proof that Israel is willing to take far-reaching steps.
Hundreds of Palestinian children will not be killed thanks to this truce. We owe it to them and to all the civilians in the Gaza Strip.
We are not ending the war. We will continue until we are victorious, going forward and continuing in other Hamas areas.
I want to be clear. The war continues. The war continues.
All right, so those were some of the reactions about this deal that's in fact been announced. And we have with us Caroline Glick, who's a former foreign policy advisor to the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, Ms. Glick, at this moment, because you've been a former foreign policy advisor to the Israeli Prime Minister, I want to ask you this. So far, the Americans have backed, the Western world has backed the Israeli offensive in the Gaza Strip that is going after Hamas, but it has also resulted in an enormous amount of collateral damage. Thousands of innocent civilians and children in the Gaza Strip have been killed. The question that I want to ask you is, the amount of support that Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel had at the beginning of this war, do you think that is now eroded because it's 7 weeks on, and at this moment what we're looking at is a humanitarian catastrophe in the Gaza Strip?
Again, I'm sorry, but I have to take issue with your characterization of events. I mean, 47 days is not 47 months, and it's not 47 years. And they started talking about a humanitarian disaster before Israel even began its ground operation in Gaza.
Are you suggesting that there is no humanitarian disaster at this moment in the Gaza Strip?
The allegation, I don't really know, and I certainly don't know that thousands of Palestinian civilians have been killed and that thousands of children have been killed. All of these data points that you're basing your claims on are given to you by Hamas. The Gaza Health Ministry is Hamas. It's a propaganda organ of Hamas. And you have to understand that they count all of their terrorists as civilians. And then people automatically parrot this data as if it's true. Nobody knows. You don't have people on the ground counting bodies and saying, this is a child, this is a this. How were they killed?
There is a solution for this. The solution is to let international
the propaganda points that are being put out by
observers to go and verify what is happening there. Because the United Nations, which has its staff on the ground, says, the United Nations chief says that Gaza has been turned into a graveyard for children. Do you disagree
and the
with
UN
this assessment?
also said that Shifa has, I'm sorry, but the UN, which is controlled by Hamas as well, UN authorities are under Hamas control in Gaza, and they also said that Shifa Hospital was not being used by Hamas, and it was.
Ms. Glick, you cannot be serious if you
They've lied
accuse
about Gaza.
the United Nations of being controlled by Hamas. You cannot be serious.
Yes, in Gaza, everybody who is in Gaza is controlled by Hamas. I think you need to recognize this. Hamas is not some sort of liberal democratic regime. Everybody who lives in Hamas, including the NGO operatives that operate in Gaza, including UN personnel. By the way, the vast majority of UNRWA personnel are members of Hamas.
All right, my last quick final question to you, Ms. Glick, because we are short of time. My last quick final question to you, because we are short of time. How much longer do you think this campaign of Israeli offensive will go on? Because first, the priority for the Netanyahu government should be to secure the release of hostages. Do you think with this deal, Netanyahu has shown that he wants to get all hostages back? Because there are still more than about 180 hostages who are still in the custody of Hamas.
No, 235 are. We haven't received any, and they're dying in custody. And of course, Netanyahu wants to see them released. Every single person in Israel wants to see them released. We haven't been doing anything but praying for their release since October 7th. To be clear, Second of all, the war will end when Hamas is destroyed. We cannot continue to coexist with a terrorist organization at our doorstep that already invaded our territory and conducted the largest slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust. We can't. There's no way we can coexist with this regime, with this jihadist organization at our doorsteps, and therefore the goal of the war is twofold.
I think you've had your say. I think you've had your say, Ms. Glick. We are completely short of time. I need to cut you off because we are short of time. I think you've had your say. Thank you very much indeed. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.